Okay, let's edit a podcast in Audacity. First thing you want to do is grab your audio files and you can drag and drop those in and it'll line them up automatically. You can also go to File and Import Audio and do the same thing. Now I'm going to do a couple of things to each of the tracks. First thing I'm going to do is normalization. So it's actually not too bad on either of these, but I'm going to do it anyways just as it's a good habit to get into. So I just hit Control A to select both of them. And I'm going to go to Effect, Volume and Compression, and I'm going to go Normalize. I put my normalized peak amplitude to -2. By default, it's at -1. -1's fine if you prefer that as well. And you saw it kind of drop the volume there a little bit. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a compressor. So with that, I'm going to select each track individually and select the first one. I'm going to go Effect, Volume and Compression, Compressor. There's a bunch of presets in here that you can use, but personally, I think the default is just fine. So I'm just going to leave it at the default and hit Apply. And notice what it did. It kind of leveled out everything so that the peaks weren't so high and the lows weren't quite so low. I'm going to do the same thing with the other track. All right, you can add the intro and outro music now if you want. I'm going to save that till the end, but it doesn't really matter either way, whichever you prefer. I'm just in the habit of adding it at the end. Now, I'll stretch these out so that way it gives me more vision as to different levels and stuff. And I'll usually do 2 passes with my edit. I'll do one, which will be my first one. Then what I usually do is I'll go through, I'll add my audio, intro and out, and then I'll do a second pass through to make sure everything's perfect in the way I want it. So you can zoom in, hit the little icon there, or if you hit the control button on your keyboard, that will allow you to zoom in as well. So we got this big gap here at the beginning. If you want to remove gaps like this, make sure that you're selecting both tracks like this. So basically I'm clicking with the mouse, I'm holding the mouse key down, I'm going up, and then I'm going over, and then I'm just going to hit the delete button and it removes it. If you just do one track like this and hit delete, it moves the whole track and now they're out of alignment. So you want to make sure that you get rid of both of them. Now I'm going to start looking for long pauses or breaths or other noises, or I'm just going to remove people saying stuff that doesn't need to be said, tighten it up as best as I can. I would rather go a bit shorter with a really good episode than longer with just a bunch of nonsense. So let's see what we have here. Of Pod Chums.
The Pod Chums podcast.
Yeah. Exciting. So notice we had this breath here. I'm going to mute this top track. Obviously you can hear it and go. That kind of stuff you generally want to get rid of. You can leave some breaths in because in life we all breathe, but sometimes they can get a bit annoying if they're excessive. So I'll do 3 things. I'll either leave it if I think it's fine, or I'll remove it completely, or I might reduce the volume on it so that it's not so loud. So for this one, let's just remove it. So I'm just going to select it and I'm going to hit this little silence audio selection, which you'll notice is also Control L on the keyboard.
For people who
And then I'm at this point just going to start playing through and listening to everything that's said. Now notice right here that there's 2 people speaking over each other.
For people who
So do I maybe want one of those speakers to be more prominent than the other? Let's take a look. Let's mute this one.
For people who effing love podcasts.
Or maybe I want the other one. Let's zoom out a little bit to make this easier. Exciting stuff. Yeah. Or maybe just let 2 people talk.
For people who effing love podcasting as much as we do.
See? Now notice he said
effing love podcast.
So I'm going to drop that second effing because we've kind of got it in there twice. And I'm going to make sure that I'm selecting both tracks the same amount, and I'm just hitting delete.
For people who effing podcasting.
Whoops.
For people who effing love podcasting as much as we do. Effing love. Effing love. People who F and love podcasting as much as
Let's get in a bit more and clean this up.
F and love podcast.
There we go.
People who F and love podcasting.
There we go. Sounds perfect. And now let's zoom back out a little bit and keep working through. There you go. Another big breath. This time I'm actually, because there's a big gap here as well. So with this one, I'm just going to delete that whole section. And then that way it just goes into the dialogue. So I guess we should talk about like why we're doing this podcast and what people are going to get podcasting. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
This is another one. I'm going to get rid of that.
About podcasting.
There's another breath there. So with this one, and in case you're wondering, on the keyboard, holding the control key is what I'm using to zoom in and out. The shift key moves left and right. So I'm going to select that and I'm going to reduce the volume on it. So I'm going to go Effect, Volume Compression, and you've got this one here, Amplify. Select that, and instead of having it go into the positives, I'm going to drop the volume, let's just say by -6, and then hit Apply, and notice it's still there, but it's not as loud. See, still got it. Another tip that I would recommend is assigning a keyboard shortcut to that amplify, because there's normally not a keyboard shortcut. So in my case, I assigned the letter A to the keyboard shortcut and it pops it up automatically, so I don't have to go into Effects, Amplify every time. Just a tip there.
Which is why we started Pod Chums. So this is going to be a pod.
Let's get rid of this breath completely.
A podcast all about podcasting. So it could be
some other things that you can get rid of if you want as well. Notice there's, when people talk, we have these certain things at the end of the things we say. And in this case, there's that little. So I'm going to get rid of that.
So it could be anything from sound.
So what I'm doing here is I'm watching for things like this, which is why I expanded the view. And then I've got headphones on so that I can very clearly hear what's being said as well. So you can see we've got stuff like this, which is sometimes maybe microphone noise or background noise, that kind of stuff. And so you can drop it or remove it completely, up to you.
As much as we do.
There you go. We're also going to have interviews with. See, I think that there you go was kind of pointless. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm just going to remove it completely. And instead of saying, we're also going to have, see, instead of saying, there you go, we're also going to have, I'm just going to go right into, we're also going to have. So think about like the flow of the conversation and get rid of some of the like unnecessary filler. Definitely pay attention to people using and stuff like that as filler words, which we often do. Here's another big gap. Intro to podcast. Big gap there, so let's get rid of that. Intro to podcasting, kind of. You should also, I forgot to show you at the beginning here, save this. Go to File, Save, say Project, and I'm going to just call this Podchums 1. And save. Because as we've all experienced at some point in time, things crash. And you certainly don't want to lose all the work you've been doing.
Yeah, their podcasting journey. So our
So you can see here, there's just a lot of stuff there that's just background. And it's interesting, you don't really notice it, but if a person's listening and they've got the ear for it, or they've got a really high quality sound system, they might hear that kind of stuff. And it's those little things that separate like quality shows from the lower quality ones sometimes. And let's get rid of that gap. And here's another one to listen for is we tend to take a breath in as we start speaking. So just before he starts talking, you've got this breath in. Listen to it enough times, it'll start to bother you. Again, either reduce it or remove it.
this was not long ago.
There we go. There's a big breath there, right? That one I'm going to reduce as well. Because again, like I said, we do breathe in. So I'm just going to reduce it by a little bit.
Yeah, but so Pod Chums is a club.
So notice the repetition. I'm going to drop that, get rid of, we don't need two.
Is a club.
So let's get rid of one of them. Now here's something else that you can do, which is kind of cool. So notice he chuckles, but then we actually have this little pause before I start speaking again. So what I can do is actually move this little chuckle here. Let's zoom out here just for a little bit to show you something. To be careful, again, when moving stuff around. So watch what happens. I'm going to grab it, and I'm just going to hit Control-C on my keyboard. And let's say I was thinking, oh, I'm just going to move it like this, and hit Control-V, watch over to the right. Notice it moved that back. So what it did there is it basically made that longer. So I'm going to hit Control-Z to undo that. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it. So Control-X, and notice it moved that back, but that's fine because when I replace it now with my Control-V, notice it moved that back to where it was. So it cuts the exact amount and just moves it around. So a quick little tip there for if you want to move bits from one section to another, but remember to always pay attention to make sure that you don't mess up the alignment of when people are talking. So again, here we've got this big pause.
Yeah, and that's
in between speaking. I tend to like to get rid of those whenever possible. In this case, I'm actually just going to remove it from right here because we can see that we've also got some background noise. You do want to allow for a little bit of a pause between speakers, but not too much throughout the world.
Yeah, and that's one of the...
And if you feel it's too much, or you did it, just Control-Z to undo.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I was going to mention. I think I would have ever...
So with this one, there's that big breath, but instead of dropping it down to 0 or lowering it, I'm going to cut it actually, and it'll tighten up this little piece of dialogue. So we have this bit.
People. And
a long breath. And so if I just drop that breath completely.
The people. And I don't...
It just speeds it up a little bit in regards to the listener not necessarily having to listen to too many pauses. Don't do that too much. You just kind of want to use your ear to decide. Now, here's what I'm actually going to keep. So notice I stumble over my words. It's useful. Sometimes I'll remove those when we say something like, and sometimes I'll keep it because, again, it's natural. People actually do that when they speak. So in this case, I've actually decided to keep it and I won't be removing it. It's useful in... Here's another one of those where we speak over each other.
Yeah, totally. You could do that.
And I've decided in this case that I'm just going to remove that one. So we'll drop it down to 0. And then I'm going to tighten this little piece of pause up. Here's something else that I'll sometimes do. And I'll actually intentionally have people talk over each other. So, for example, I might do this because you know how we often tend to start speaking when then the person's about done or maybe when they're laughing. So in this case, casting existing.
Yeah, and that leads to...
So he nicely paused. But what I might do, and have done in the past, I'm not going to necessarily do it with this one, but I do want to show it to you. So I'm going to cut it like I did earlier, and I'm actually going to paste it and get rid of that bit. Podcasting.
Yeah, and that leads to a point.
See, because we sometimes speak over each other. So sometimes I'll actually intentionally have people speak over one another. In this case, I'm not doing it, but I did want to show you that.
That leads to a point that podcasting is such a democratized medium, which is so refreshing.
Another thing that people tend to do is acknowledge when somebody else is speaking. So this is just us being polite as listeners. So we'll often say, yeah, to acknowledge, to let them know that we're listening. But in podcasting, sometimes that can be annoying.
Man, so, you're going out there.
So notice I was like,
you're going out there.
And I've decided I'm going to remove that because, again, it can be distracting sometimes from what's being said. So occasionally I'll remove those or type of things that we just naturally say when we're actively listening to others. I think laughter is another one of those situations where I like to have people overlap each other. So for example,
On it anyway. And two, there's no.
it just kind of feels weird with that pause after the laughing ends. It's like silence. So what I would do in this type of a situation is shorten it a bit. And I would actually move my laughter over a little bit. So that way it starts.
Anyway. And two, there's no like.
See, it sounds a little better like that.
There's no like overlord.
Okay, so now I've done my first pass at the edit, and I'm going to add my intro and outro music. Go to File, Import, Audio. Grab my intro and outros. So with the intro, you actually want that to be on your top line. So let's squeeze everything down just a bit. And I'm going to select the intro line, and it's got a move to top option. And I'm going to grab my outro and just drag it to the very end. So you might have saw me do it earlier. There's this option here of fit project to width so that you can see the whole thing. So let's just move that to the end. Now with the intro, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. When looking at it, I know I want it to kind of fade out right about here. So let's play it for just a second. Mute these two tracks. See, so it's going to fade out as we kind of start speaking. So there we go. Okay. So let's unmute these, and I'm going to grab both tracks and make sure I've got my little hand up there, and I'm going to slide it. Whoops. I'm going to select both tracks. I'm going to move my little hand above, and I'm going to slide them to about where I want it to fade out, which is going to be right about here. So I can see I'm going to start fading out right there where this person starts speaking. So let's see how that looks. Well, welcome to the first episode of... Perfect. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab it because I know I want it to start fading out where this person starts speaking. So I'm going to grab that bit, maybe a little bit more. And I'm going to use the effect, fading, and fade out. So you can see it starts to fade it down. Well, welcome to the first episode of... And I think the overall volume's a bit too high on that one as well. So let's adjust that down just a bit. So maybe 2. Let's see how that sounds. What I'm doing is I'm looking at my levels here. Well, welcome to the first episode of Pod Chumps.
The Pod Chums podcast.
Yeah.
For
Exciting
people
stuff.
who effing love podcasting as much as we do.
Yeah, I think I might need to fade out just a little bit more here towards the end. So let's just grab that bit, the A, and I'm just going to drop it down just a bit more. You just kind of got to play with it. Well, welcome to the first episode of... I'm happy with that. Now, tip. So now that I've got these levels where I want them, right about there is where I'm generally going to have it. What you can do, just delete your other tracks temporarily. So in this case, let's go doot, doot, doot. I'll do a quick save on everything so I've got it. So I'm going to grab the lower tracks, everything, and I'm going to delete them for just a second. And now what I'm going to do is I've got my intro, and I'm going to export it because now I know those levels are where I want them. Now that should have exported. Yep. Now I'm just going to do a quick Control Z to get everything back. And I'm going to do basically the same thing with the outro at the very end. So let's just zoom into there.
helpful for you.
Yeah, we've got articles on there that are available. If you would like to see them, check them out. And just personal experiences.
Yeah.
So in this one, who would like to see them, check them out, and just personal experiences.
Yeah. So we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Late night or midday, anytime you choose. Join the pod jump sway, no way you can lose.
So that one I'm happy with, so I don't need to actually make any further adjustments to the outro. Now, I've got my music, I've got my outro, and like I mentioned right at the beginning, I'm going to start over, and I'm going to go through the whole thing again.
The Pod Chums podcast.
Yeah.
For
Exciting
people
stuff.
who effing love podcasting as much as we do.
See, so now that I've listened to this a second time, I've decided I'm going to remove that little bit. And cut out this.
The Pod Chums podcast. For people who effing love podcasting as much as we do.
There you go. So I guess we should talk. Sounds a bit more professional, I think. So you do miss stuff, so notice that, yeah. Good.
Yeah. Yeah, so.
And especially because it was kind of a bit distorted. So that's definitely a good one to get rid of. And let's get rid of that bit of that pause. Does that sound good?
Yeah, so this is a podcast all about podcasting, but I thought our first episode should be.
And then when it's all done, you've got it exactly where you want it. Go ahead and export. Export audio. WAV is generally the better quality, but a lot of the podcast platforms prefer MP3. In this case, MP3.
Anytime you choose. Join the pod jump sway, no way